Bank Innovation Foundation for hosting this important event. And most of all, thank you, Vaclav, for joining us here to talk about the energy transition.
Thank you.
Vaclav, I'd like to start by asking you about the backdrop to this huge surge that we believe is coming in energy demand. What does the global energy landscape look like right now?
I'll try to speak slowly because of the audio across the ocean, whatever.
Yeah.
I have the tendency to go fast, so I slow down. Look,
okay.
The system is so big that it just doesn't tolerate, and it's impossible to make any rapid changes. This is one fundamental thing which people misunderstand about global energy affairs. If you are a tiny country, you can do things fast, and you can do things on a quote-unquote big scale within your borders. But globally, the system is so massive, close to 9 billion tons of coal, more than 4 billion tons of crude oil, right? Trillions of cubic meters of natural gas, right? Petawatt hours, that's 10 to 15 hours of electricity generated. So a system like that cannot move very rapidly, right? Yet many people mistake the global energy system for whatever, something which happened in Silicon Valley. You can do and break things and make fast. No, you cannot, right? So when you look at the system today and last year and 10 years ago, right, it's growing very slowly. Everything is growing. And this is one thing which is important to realize. I will repeat it twice. There has been no energy transition. There has been no energy transition. We now use more fossil fuels than ever. Now we now produce more wind and solar electricity than ever. That's very true, right? But that's added onto the fossil fuel production, right?
Okay.
The energy transition would mean that we are moving away from fossil fuels and supplanting those fossil fuels by renewable energies. We are not doing that. We are using more fossil energies, and we are also adding to it more renewable energies. So that's what's happening, right? But energy transition, defined as getting out of carbon, less and less carbon every year, that is yet to happen. Every year for the past century, we've added more and more carbon, with the exception of whatever, middle of the Second World War or the middle of the pandemic, right? But we recover very rapidly, right? So when you look at what people are concerned about, right, the increase of atmospheric concentration of CO2, and we measure it in Hawaii, in Mauna Loa, far away from any pollution, very reliably. That level is going up every year. So last year we reached another record level, about 427 parts per million, about 2 parts per million higher than the year before, right? So we are putting still more fossil carbon into the atmosphere. CO2 levels are increasing, and consumption of fossil fuel is increasing. Now, it depends what it is. Last year, we had used again more coal because of China and India, but the increase was very small, less than 1%. But significantly, a little bit more of crude oil, but again about 1%, but much more natural gas. It was another record year for natural gas, right? So all 3 fossil fuels have been up, really, and very likely will be repeated this year. It's very interesting, that the International Energy Agency, they always look at these big pictures and they say, oh, look at these record numbers of solar, record numbers, but how persistent the coal is. Well, they are the last people to wonder why it's persistent, because it's the foundation of our electricity generation system. Because if I have a coal-fired power plant, I can run it basically nonstop, right? If I have a solar power plant, well, I cannot run it nonstop. Some take care of it, some goes down a bit, right? So the difference between intermittent and constant sources is important because, and I will return to it later, our society demands more and more of constant electricity through the day and through the night, really, which the renewables cannot deliver unless we would have massive energy storage. And we don't have that because, again, it's difficult to get to that scale. So one thing which is to remember here, that these are on a global level, the systems are massive and it's move very, very slowly. They do move, but very slowly. And it takes decades to show some big difference. But so far, no global decarbonization, still more fossil fuels, while we have more renewables. So this is where the system is. And with electricity, it's always the same. Electricity, demand for electricity always grows faster than the demand for coal or oil or natural gas, right? So electricity has been going fast for all kinds of reasons, right? Populations are growing, countries are industrializing, people in warm countries want to have air conditioning. And now, of course, this is added this latest saga of these AI centers. But this is just the latest addition to long-term demand, rising demand for electricity, which rises faster than the demand for fuels.
Well, Vaclav, let's dig a little deeper into that last comment you made about the new demand from generative AI, data centers, and of course our moral need to provide power or allow the global south to have power and help that process. What does all this mean given the backdrop that you've just painted for us?
Well, there is one great thing, of course, the fundamental thing which we don't know. We don't know how fast this will go, right? We may say reasonably about a year or two ahead, really, but even 5 years ahead, we cannot say. And of course, 10 years ahead, it's almost impossible. Now, we have a number of forecasts because it's such a fashionable thing. So everybody, this is a forecasting society to begin with, right? You know, we don't understand the past. We don't understand the present, but we always want to forecast what will happen in the future, right? So everybody's forecasting. So we have many forecasts, especially for the United States, where there is a bulk of this capacity happening, right? And these forecasts are basically that between now and 2030, these short-term forecasts, you would need something on the order of 50 gigawatts of new electricity generating capacity. Now, for people who don't work with these numbers, they don't, you know, it's 50 of whatever gigawatt is. Gigawatt happens to be 10 to 9 watts. That is 1 billion watts, okay? And to bring it closer to understanding for people who never work with these numbers, a city of 1 million people in a rich country is about 1 gigawatt. So
the city of 1 million is 1 gigawatt.
People, it could be half gigawatt, it could be 1.5. But you know, it's not great kind of simplification to say 1 million people in the Western world is 1 gigawatt of electricity. Steady, that's what it was. Now we have many megacities, 10 million and plus, right? City of 10 million people, right, would easily require 10 gigawatts, right? So when you look at the requirement, like 50 gigawatts in US alone between now and 2030, it's like adding 50 cities of 1 million people. I mean, you know, let's concentrate your attention, right? You know, this is very, very substantial, right? Okay. Globally, the forecasts are about 100 gigawatts, twice as much as the US total, right? So globally, we would have to add electricity capacity equivalent to consumption of the cities of 1 million, of 100 cities of 1 million people. It would be 100 gigawatts, right? This is extremely substantial addition, right? Now, the thing is that it's even worse than it seems because it's concentrated. So let's say even if half will be in the US, equivalent of 51 million cities, it would not be 1 million city per one nation, per one state. The 50 states in the union, right? You know, no, it will be concentrated in certain areas, right? There will not be many centers in Alaska, and there will be many centers in North Dakota. Centers will be either close to the action, right? Basically, as they are now, that is in the eastern United States, okay, or somewhere in isolated places, let's say next to large solar capacity, maybe in Arizona or in California. So there'll be large concentration of it. So this means, you know, that some places would have almost no new capacity. Some other places would carry like bulk of that capacity. It will be very unevenly distributed, which means it would put great stress on the local production of electricity and the local supply of water for cooling, because these are massive enterprises which needs lots of cooling, right? So, you know, there are all sorts of environmental problems here, and all sorts of the NIMBY, not in my backyard problems, because who wants to have these centers located, like whatever, 20% of it in Virginia, Maryland, around DC, right? You know, so the problem is much more complex than it seems. So if you say, you know, 50 gigawatts, like 50 cities to 1 million people, but they will be concentrated in certain areas, right? So it's even worse than it seems. So if that would be totally executed, this would be almost unprecedented, would have put great burden on our electricity system, especially in the US, because US has, unfortunately, one of the shoddiest, weakest, least performance system, because it doesn't have the national grid, and it's constructing the new grid at a very, very slow rate, and it has had real problems in making advances in electric generation, even like 10% similar to what has happened in China over the past 20 years. So when you contrast what happened in electricity in China and US, right, almost incomparable. not in favor of the US. So yes, if it will be all executed, it's a very serious problem.
I'm talking to you exactly from one of the areas you mentioned. I'm in Maryland right now, and I'd love you to dig a little bit more deeply into what these changes mean for the grid, for the cooling systems, for material requirements. Give us some of the technology that exists now and how it could or wouldn't adapt to this new demand.
Again, this is because the demand is so big, so people are grasping, they are looking, they say, we cannot do it all with one source. And now, of course, in United States and in Europe, nuclear has not been in favor for past generation. For past 25 years, there's been almost very little at it in the US, almost nothing at it in Europe. Germany, the largest economy in the US and in Europe, they said, forget it, they totally left the nuclear behind. But now suddenly there is this rush because, we only need 50, 100 gigawatts. How can we do it, right? We cannot do it all by wind and solar because we do not have enough storage capacity and they work only during the time when the sun shines and wind blows. So we have to do something else. Of course, the gas turbines are the best thing available, right? Because you can order them rapidly. Siemens and General Electric will make a gas turbine for you. They could be of almost any size from 5 megawatts to almost 1 gigawatt now, 800 megawatts. So, and you can order them, you can install them very rapidly. You can install them in a matter of few months, really, right? But that will not be enough. So renewables cannot carry it alone. There will not be enough gas turbines so rapidly. So how about the nuclear? So there is this new thing, nuclear. But these centers, because they'll be dispersed, right? Some will be very big, but many of them will be smaller. So people say, this will be a match for what we call the small nuclear reactors, right? Now, my question always is to people, how many small nuclear reactors are operating in the Western world today commercially? And the answer, of course, is zero, right? How many will be operating next year? And the answer is zero, right? To operate a nuclear reactor, you have to go through the process, After all, it's a nuclear reactor. It's not a toy, really, right? So there is something called regulatory nuclear energy commission, right? And these people take kind of years rather than a few weeks to decide. Now, let me give you these numbers again. So remember, 1 gigawatt is like city of 1 million people. I will need to add in US alone 50 gigawatts. When I talk about a small nuclear reactor, right? This could be only like some of it as small as 25. Well, actually, this Oklo will start with 15 megawatts only, then 25, and standard will be 15 megawatts. 50 megawatts into 50 gigawatts, that's 1,000 times. So if you want to cover the US demand between now and 2030, which is supposed to be another 50 gigawatts, right, by small nuclear reactors, each of them 50 megawatts, you would need thousands of them. Can you imagine the United States by 2030, having thousands of small nuclear reactors dotted around the country when we have none today, right? Well, I don't have to go any further. Not going to happen, right? Okay.
I do have a question about SMRs because submarines are powered by it. There are nuclear submarines. Tell us why the technology that powers a nuclear submarine isn't the same as what we would need on land too.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely yes. These are fission nuclear reactors. It's not fission. These are fission nuclear reactors, which we used on nuclear submarines, on the Russian unit, on icebreakers, and we generate electricity in the US. 20% plus electricity in France. 70% plus electricity is coming from fission nuclear reactors, right? So reactors are the same, except there is a smaller size, so it will be more flexible. So you could approve them faster, right? Instead of big one, and you could locate them, in all kinds of places. So we know how to do it. In principle, there is nothing. We mastered nuclear electricity. After all, as I say, France is getting more than 70% of it from it. US more than 20%, globally about 12% now. So we are masters of the technique. We know how to do it, really. But one question is to know how to do it. The other question to know how to do hundreds of them or even thousands of them in the next 5 years, right? That's a different matter, right? So we know exactly how to do it, but the approval process, and then even if the nuclear regulatory bodies approve it, then the people will say, well, do I want a nuclear reactor in my backyard, really, right? And these centers are really in the backyards of the cities. You can go on the Google Earth, you can see there is a new data center in Virginia, and next to it, There is a suburban housing, people having houses $500,000. Do people having houses $500,000 want a nuclear reactor literally across their fence, really, right? That's the question, right? So it's not a question of being able to do it technically. Oh, we can build, give us money and approval, and we can build 1,000 reactors, if we put our mind to it, right? But is it going to happen? And then you have the countries, especially like in Germany, they are not going to start building them right now after they, forestalled them a few years ago. So no, not going to happen. So some of it will undoubtedly happen, right? But always, you look back and you always say, people, 2021 say, oh, by 2026 we'll be operating it. Now you look at Oklo, they say maybe 2027 will be operating it. Right? It always keeps going like that, It's like Musk Hyperloop. Have you seen any Hyperloop? By this time, every city in the world should have been connected by Hyperloop. There is no Hyperloop. There will never be any Hyperloop, basically. But this is the problem, right? Technical hype and engineering reality, right?
Okay, so now I want to ask you about another area where I think there may be technical hype and maybe something coming in the further future. Take us a little bit through fusion energy. We've seen an awful lot of interest in investment. Some companies probably more realistic than others. We had ignition at Livermore in 2022. What's the prospect for fusion, a clean fusion energy, which is much less unsafe than fission?
If I would be gambling, I would put all my money on small nuclear reactors and absolutely no money on fusion.
Okay, tell us why.
One day, you can sing this song one day. Yeah, it's going to happen, But
that's been one day for a long time.
I think the best thing I can do instead of blabbering around this, a few years ago I wrote this book called Invention and Innovation, and it's been translated in all kinds of languages. So there is a Spanish edition of it, and so there's a long chapter about fusion there, explaining in detail why. It's been always, next 10 years, next 5 years, there's a good reason for it. There are immense technical obstacles. No, I better don't get into it because, I would need at least 5 minutes to go through the basic problem. The problem is this, that...
But we are seeing, Commonwealth is building in Virginia. We're seeing, and we saw ignition from Livermore. So there are some
No. What happened there? You see, again, a total misunderstanding. What happened there, that there was actually no positive. It just measured. I don't want to get it. It's very technical.
Okay.
What happened there? Let's say there was no net energy gain actually because the amount of so there was a kind of a energy gain at the point of contact, so to speak, but there was no overrun. We are still light years away from it, right? So the best example is this. Most people heard about ITER, the international
France
consortium of countries building in southern France. We've been building it for ages. Now it's been always postponed schedule. It will cost tens of billions of dollars and will be probably operational maybe like 2035, 2040. This is the real picture, not some small company, because there is lots of money sloshing in the US. And so some small company comes up and say, oh, I will start up fusion. It's easy to do. They'll financially give some money, right? But the technical problems, look at ITER, look how slowly it's proceeding, and what are they saw in 2030, 2035, 2040. Now they say basically we will reach something like a commercial level, maybe by 2045, 2050, right? So this is the realistic view of it, really. The best minds of more than a dozen countries who are working on it, this is this agreement, not some startup company in the US who just wants to suck in the money and sell it. And no. So if there is a great difficulty of putting whatever 100 or 1,000 small reactors in place by 2030, it's impossible to say that fusion will solve it by 2030. That's not even, that's what I call a no-brainer, right? 2045, maybe, right? I will not be around. But 2040, absolutely no.
Okay, so I want to ask you a little bit about energy security. It's becoming the war in Ukraine has alerted much of Europe to the need to have its own energy sources. If you were able to advise Germany, for example, about what they should do in order to increase their own energy security, what would you say?
This is interesting, that I've been living with this business for 60 plus years, and people always worry about security. I don't, because there is plenty of energy out there. I mean, another record year of LNG Well, look at Germany. Okay, so Germany stopped. Let's be clear. Europe hasn't stopped totally importing Russian energy. Europe is still importing Russian liquefied natural gas, right? To the French company Total. So it's still, Europe is still, quote unquote, financing the war in Ukraine, giving money to Russians, right? But most of the imports of crude oil stopped there, right? Okay? But so Germany turned to Norway, and Germany turned to the United States, right? There is a surplus of oil in the global market. Record number of liquefied natural gas are coming on the market this year, right? There is no shortage of any form of energy. If you have money, you can buy. Oil prices are very low. There are massive new supplies coming from several places. When Guyana start working, Guyana will be like whatever, another half of Saudi Arabia. So if you are willing to pay, Americans, Canadians, Qataris, people from Nigeria, I mean, everybody's willing to sell. So when you look at Germany, Germany is in such a situation, actually, the biggest economy in Europe, their electricity consumption declined last year, actually. This is a country which is declining electricity consumption, right? This is a country in deep industrial trouble, right? So Germany actually doesn't need more energy. Germany is actually consuming less energy. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's a fact, right? So, as I say, if you are willing to pay, now, of course, there will be some real problems in Iran. So Iranian will not be on the market. But so what, we've been through worse. So I wouldn't be panicking about not having enough to buy. If you have money, you can buy whatever you want. There is, let's put it again, clearly, there is no shortage of electricity, of energy, of any kind of global market. No shortage at all, right? Look at the rise of China. The rise of China couldn't have happened without massive imports of natural gas and crude oil, right? It's been all covered. China is the second or first largest economy in the world. You count it, massive imports over the past 25 years, no problem, right? So, a country like Germany, 80 million versus 1.4 billion for, no. So think of it, we covered China, right? So what's the problem, right? No, I wouldn't worry about, Europeans always worry about security, right? I would worry about military security, not about energy security, right?
Okay, so no worry about energy security if you have the money to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? But it's cheap now. We have no record prices now. There is no record price for oil or gas or whatever. It's affordable now. It's as affordable as it has been, right? It's not like the first energy crisis, 73, 74, when the prices quintupled overnight, so to speak, right? From $2 to $10 per barrel. It's not like that. Energy is affordable, right?
Cost not only of money, but of a carbon footprint. And I'd love you to talk a little bit more about where renewables fit in this. Wind, solar, other alternatives that could help solve the carbon problem, even as we realize there's enough energy out there.
All of the above, right? Absolutely. This energy system is complex. So we need we need more efficient fossil fuel generation, and we need all these. But above all, and this is something which again, after working in business for all my lifetime, it's just amazing how people totally ignore the single largest source of this. And this is not wasting our energy. And we are societies which are engaged in massive waste of energy. And you see, because it's easier to build a new capacity, because it's one spot or 10 spots, so 10 new power plants, 10 new oil fields, whatever, rather than affecting millions of consumers. It's always more difficult to change the behavior or attitude or lifestyle of millions or billions of people, rather than saying, oh, I'll build this, I'll build this, I'll build that, okay? Let me give you a few examples of how horribly wasteful we are. Our food system, everybody has to eat. This is the essential thing there. Our food system, growing the stuff, processing the stuff, transporting the stuff, selling the stuff, bringing it home, cooking it, takes 30% of global energy. 1/3 basically of global energy is spent on food system, which is totally indispensable. After we are done with it, we waste 40% of it. 40% of our food is wasted, right? So we spend 30% of world energy on producing it, transporting it, moving it, cooking it, and then we waste 40% of it, right? Absolutely incredible. Why do we waste 40% of it? because we don't pay anything for it, right? It used to be, people don't remember, there is no institutional memory. In 1950, average family in Europe paid 60% of its disposable income for food. Now it's 12%. Why should you save 12%, right? You know, in US, it's about 8, 9, well, it's going up now, but still, you know. So basically, rich countries are now paying between 10 and 15% of disposable family income for food. When I was a boy in the early 50s, they were paying 50 to 60%. They were not wasting 40% of food. Believe me, really, right?
We valued it.
England, even in England, until 1954, food was rationed. Until 1954, people were not wasting 40% of it, right? So this is one thing. Enormous waste in food. The other example, SUVs. Nobody asked for an SUV. Did you ask for an SUV to be made, really? Until 1985, there was no SUV. Then Ford discovered it's, of course, cheaper to just crank the metal and sell it for a higher price, right? So we got SUVs. Between 1985 and now, the average SUV is now 40% heavier. Do we need ever heavier SUVs? They are getting ever heavier, right? They look now like a small tanker, right? Do we need ever heavier SUVs, right? Here's a window. I'm looking the window at frozen Red River, right? It's a triple window. It's a triple window. Your energy loss is cut down by 30 to 40% compared to double window. Forget about single window. In the US, less than 2% of people have triple windows. In the US, most people have never seen a triple glass window, right? Even in Canada, it's less than 20%. Everybody has a double window by now. Only in Sweden is like 70%. But see, so imagine if everybody will be driving a reasonable car, 1 ton, instead of 3-ton SUV. If everybody would not be wasting 30% of food, if everybody would have a triple window instead of single window, you would not need fusion reactors. You would not need solar, whatever. This is the biggest source of energy which we have, our waste, which is absolutely immense. And I'll tell you about the especially European waste. Europeans travel more madly than Americans. In US and Canada, I have never met anybody who was to Seychelles or Mauritius. Have you been to Seychelles or Mauritius?
Me? No, I have not.
No. Okay. In Europe, ask people. In Europe, everybody went to Seychelles or Mauritius. Bali, everybody in Europe has been to Bali. These people fly longer distances for vacation than Americans now. Europeans say, oh, we save more energy than Americans. But they fly like crazy. In Spain, everybody's always in Canary Islands all the time, so to speak, right?
Cheap flights.
Europeans are, so Europeans long distance flying. Germany, until before COVID, Germany was spending more money on tourism, country of 80 million people, than US, 80 million, 340 million, right? So, Europeans say, oh, we are so energy saving, but flight is the most energy intensive form of energy consumption, right? If you want to have on beach, why not to go to Italy instead of to Bali, right? And so it goes. So the whole Western society is based on one principle: waste as much energy as you can in food, in cars, in houses, in travel, right? And then you say, how should we get more energy? This is really stupid. If you are rational, you should need less energy, right? This is why I don't have a 3-ton SUV and I have a triple window in my house and super efficient furnace, right? And so on. People have single window and they fly to Seychelles. And then they complain, oh, energy security. Give me a break.
Think a little bit for me about the public policy changes that could help bring about some of the shifts in behavior you're talking about. Do you see them in any country? You mentioned Sweden earlier on.
Look, Germany is the example. They traveled farthest in terms of this green conversion, right? But you know what happened? It's just most people don't realize what happened in Germany. In Germany, between let's say past decade, 2015 to 2025, these people over past 10, 15 years, they increased their generating capacity massively because they put so much solar and wind, right? But because it doesn't work too much, right? What we call the load factor, capacity factor is low, right? Their total electricity production actually is less than 10 years ago. So they produce less electricity with vastly increased capacity, which they invested money in, right? And in 2015, they were a net electricity exporter. Now they are net electricity importer, and they have the highest electricity prices in Europe. That's the way to go, really. right? So clearly, this hasn't been such a great success, right? And they're so proud. We install more wind and solar than anybody else. Highest electricity prices, total electricity production is down actually, right? There are no easy solutions. People are looking for it. Technical solutions always come up with the other side, right? You always have some other problems, right? The best solution, if you don't need that new energy at all, if you don't use it, that's the best solution, because you are not doing any environmental problem. If I don't use that energy, there is no environmental impact if I don't use it, right? No matter what energy I use additional, there'll be environmental impact, right? All these solar plants, all these photovoltaic plants, all these panels will have to be totally replaced in whatever, 15, 20, 25 years. Who's producing those panels now? Almost only China, right? So you'll be forever dependent on China, replacing your photovoltaic panels, right? And so on, right? So, I don't know how many times I've said it, but it's useless, because no many times, how many say people want to use more. People will never say the solution is to use less. People absolutely refuse to consider more, more, more. That's the ethos of Western society. Consume more, hence waste more. Consume less, waste less. No, there is no traction.
I'm going to turn in a minute to audience questions, but before I do so, I wanted to ask you about the significance of the US retreat from its climate obligations or climate agreements. How globally, what does it mean that the US has stepped back both in its domestic approach?
Because most of the new additions coming from China and India, and they'll add as much as they see fit, right? Again, China. See, people always say this is the peak of China coal. There'll be no more whatever, right? Well, yet another that last year again, of course, they already produced China's produced like billion. So it's not up 10%, but it's up again by 0.5%. So another record year for coal. And for India, even more, because India is in a hurry. India cannot do China, so to speak. India cannot repeat what China has done in the past 20 years. Too complicated. Why? But they cannot grow that fast. But they are trying to grow as fast as possible. And part of it is, of course, they need more and more electricity. So they are building it as fast as they can. So they are building plenty of solar, right? But again, sun goes down, but the electric train doesn't go down when sun goes down. Plus in India, everybody wants to have air conditioning. When do you want that air conditioning? During the night. So you would sleep really, right? But there is no solar, no wind really, right? Okay. So India will be building as many coal-fired power plants as it possibly technically can, right? Okay. And so will be some other countries, right? So it's irrelevant in global terms. Europe can stop consuming coal, but as long as Asia and Africa will be consuming more coal, the total coal consumption will go up, as it is now. Now, before too long, eventually we will reach the so-called peak coal, maybe 27, 28, right? But what will happen when we reach that peak coal? It will not collapse. It will go down very, very slowly, because billions of people depend on that coal, right? So the US not being part of any international agreements almost irrelevant, because there is more coal coming in Asia, and there is more oil coming in Asia and Africa, and there is more natural gas everywhere. Everybody wants to have more natural gas, right? So we will reach the peak fossil fuels sometime, whenever, I don't forecast, right? But not anytime soon. And when we reach the peak, this will not be followed by any collapse, right? Be followed by a very, very slow decline, right? So these are the realities, again, that I started today. Massive scale. A massive scale cannot do anything like that. It doesn't jump, right? It just moves. It does change. You look over 30 years later, look back and say, oh, it has changed. But it's a generational change. So decarbonization, getting the fossil fuel, these are generational changes, not year to year.
Vaclav, we have a couple of questions here from the audience. Forgive me, I'm going to read them. And I also want to encourage people who are listening to send in your questions. But forgive me as I read this. If we strip away the hype, which part of the AI-related energy demand growth is truly unavoidable, and which part is still optional, depending on efficiency gains and the actual usefulness of AI workloads?
Well, you see, this is another thing which I didn't go into. Of course, there are so many things that these things, like everything else, everything in electronics becomes more efficient in time, right? So our forecast today, what the total demand will be by 2030, 35, is based on what we need today. But 5 or 10 years from now, the processing information per whatever, per byte, per one set of testing, per one set of training for AI, will definitely get more efficient. That's been the trend always in our electronics. Things get more efficient. It's much more difficult to forecast how much more efficient we'll get, but they'll get more efficient. So that's another, wrench in the works. We know it will improve, so we will need relatively less than we think now, but how much it will improve. The other thing is, to what extent we will go, because we are in the early stages. In early stages, there is always this hype, right? When we started with personal computers, we thought, every child should have a personal computer. Everybody will be brilliant, right? Turned out that every child doesn't have a personal computer, and then the reading score and math score have gone down, actually, okay? Instead of going up, right? So we just don't know. Early days. I urge people to, as they say in airlines, sit back and relax, right? This AI will not go that fast and that far. It will not, quote unquote, totally transform the world. It will not get rid of 80% of people. Just wait, look back, and then they say, right? So I would say chill, cool, really, right? And wait, 5 years from now, we'll have a better perspective, right? Don't forget, that's in the interest of people flogging it for their financial benefit to tell us all these marvelous things, right? You look back and they will not be so marvelous, right? Just think what happened with the medium which we are using now. It's useful, right? But can anybody tell me if it changed the world totally positively for the better? I have a deep doubts, right? The amount of electronic scamming, the crime, human and drug trafficking, which is enabled by all these electronics, right? Just immensely, right? So who can tell me if the net has been net positive or net negative? Who can tell me that, really? Can we even say that? We can't really. So who can tell me now that AI will be net negative or net positive, right? I have no idea, nor does anybody else, right? So I would say relax, just, this is one of the, people want to know, right? But we will not know until it will happen. So, but in any case, a large chunk of it is hype, right? So eventually we don't need much less of it than we, one thing which I should say, all our long-range electricity forecasts have been always wrong. Either too low or too high, depending on what country you are, right? Think of it. Germany used less electricity last year. Who would have said the biggest, on the other end, China is still keeps rising, right?
Forecasting, you're giving us a very
forecasting.
good...
That's the issue of forecasting, right? It's your peril, right? And long-range forecast, if you look, they may work because I say, many years ago, I made a perfect forecasting long-range energy consumption in China. I was right on the dot by making two mistakes, by assuming one thing too low and too high, so they cancel each other, and I did that perfectly. So by making two stupid errors, I end up right. So since that time, it was in 1975, I don't forecast. I haven't done any forecast in 1975, okay?
Another question for you from the audience. I'm going to read it again. A 100 gigawatt load is huge. It reshapes power systems. Historically, such loads were justified by clear societal necessities: steel, chemicals, transport.
Right.
By that standard, which current uses of AI genuinely justify priority access to energy, and which ones would you classify as optional or even wasteful at the system level? Interesting.
Well, that's a very tough question to answer, but first things first, I would always say, we should pour, and we are actually pouring resources into it. We are pouring quite a bit into health management. This is where I think, because the effects would be immense, right? We need improvement. See, most of our hospitals, because population is aging, right? So our hospitals, our nursing homes, they're overburdened, right? Our diagnostic capabilities are improved, but still they could improve much more. Our drug prescription should be optimized. So anything which has to deal with medicine, health, long-term care of all people, that should be prioritized, because that should actually truly help most of the individuals, most of the families in a very tangible manner, right? Forget about some whatever, right? I just first things first, right? And as I said, we made tremendous progress, but still, we make so many misdiagnoses. If you end up in hospital, they are bound to make mistakes in operations, in drug prescription. There are sheets of studies published on this, right? So this is where this because on anything to do with healthcare and this improvement of starting with drug trials, because that's very expensive and long. So from drug trials to treatment of people in senior centers, from drug prescriptions to diagnosis, from management, optimizing emergency treatment in hospitals, everything. So everything we just do with health and medicine, this should be our priority, because that's where actually we can improve the information flow and make a real difference for people in terms of life and death or survival, right? So that's what I will look at, People will be disappointed with that answer because, some fancy word. No, first things first, right? And second thing, how to optimize our food system, because our food system is so wasteful, right? That I would start with the low-hanging fruit and fruit which can really be tasted very soon, really, in a matter of years or days, rather than a matter of decades, right? So I don't want to change the entire economy, right, or reshuffle whatever whole. No, just give me a better health and less waste of food.
We've got another question I can see coming here. It's nuclear related. The questioner asks, what about big tech AI strategy? Restart of several nuclear power stations in the USA. How much of this type of projects are on the pipeline? So I'm not very far from 3 Mile Island right now, and I never thought I would see it being reworked as, I guess, Constellation Energy. But I think the questioner is asking, what about the restart of big fission power plants?
Yeah, but you see that actually it's been done. It's being done. It's been done. Yeah, but again, what is the total compared to the capacity needed, right? So I don't have. I would have to look up the exact latest data, but I suppose even if we would restart some of them, then we just simply dismantled or left alone. So I say even if we would restart very significant share of that abundant capacity, still this would not be a big chunk of solution, right? But then don't forget, this is not only the US problem, right? At least half or more that capacity will have to be abroad, right? And many countries don't have any nuclear. Italy never had any nuclear, right? Britain is basically out of it now, building, but very little, right? Germany shut it down, right? When you look at these new upcoming countries, India, very limited. So again, this may be at best one little addition to the complex solution. In itself, it cannot be even like a big chunk of solution. So yes, if you can do it, yes, but it will be a marginal contribution.
Another question about the time it takes to build these plants. The questioner says, he says the building time of a nuclear power plant. Why is China able to build a unit in less than 5 years and the US takes so much longer?
Yeah, well, that's very simple, right? Because in China, you just simply say, we will build it, and they build it, right? People have no say in it, right? This is a society run by one party and 7 old men in Politburo, right? America is not run by one man, although many people think it's not, but it is not, right? It's a vibrant democratic society where people have say if somebody is putting something in their backyard, right? So in US, you have to overcome zillions of regulatory and then famous NIMBY, not in my backyard hurdles. So that's a difference between democratic society, where we need a consensus, or at least some consensus, to force something, and a society which is one party dictatorial, essentially, let's not dance around, now a Stalin system, because one man is running the show now. He just, if you don't know, he just purged the number 2 man just a week ago, right? Just number 1 man, just that's it. It's only him, right? Okay. So in a society like that, you do what one man says to it, right? US, fortunately, is not a society like that. So please don't compare US and China, because I don't want to compare them. I don't want to live in a country like China.
Okay, another question actually about an individual. What is your view on Elon Musk's plan to build data centers in space? Free power 24/7 and free cooling is the
Let me
question.
just tell you that in 2016 or 17, Elon Musk said by 2024, he will start colonizing Mars. Are we colonizing Mars? He said that we will have hyperloops, as I already said, connecting all cities everywhere. Do we have a single hyperloop, right? Etc., etc. Rest the case. There are several websites which are listing all the false predictions and all the false claims he's made. He's a false claim making machine, right? Our whole website's devoted to what he said and what hasn't happened and what will never happen. You are absolutely welcome to believe all what he says. People believe all kinds of things, right? That's what religion is about. So if your religion is Elon Musk, please be welcome and just believe whatever he says, right? I would stay away. I wouldn't touch it with the long pole, as they say, right?
You wouldn't touch it with a long pole. Another question. This one is about subsidies. If the EU aims to effectively reduce energy consumption without relying on subsidies, which have proven ineffective and contribute to inflation, what would be the smartest approach? So a non-subsidy approach to reducing energy consumption in the EU.
But you see, this is just the thing, right? In the ideal world, you wouldn't do it, but these economies, as they have developed, right? In our economies, we basically subsidize everything. You know, it's just not. So people would pick up saying, what is not subsidized in one way or the other? Right? Where do you draw the line between the politics of it, the economics of it? Right? It's not arbitrary, but to such a large extent, it is arbitrary. People always say, you know, well, let's go back to food. Basically, all food in the West, people always forget about it. People always want to talk about nuclear electricity or fusion or wind or whatever. No, the most important energy form in the world is food, because you have to eat essentially, not every day, but whatever, right? All food everywhere around the world is subsidized, directly and indirectly, right? It's just the level of subsidy is different. Canada subsidizes this way, US this way, EU that way, and Japan that way, right? Just the levels of subsidy differ. But just about everybody is subsidizing it, right? I don't have to tell you in US, corn farmers, they wouldn't survive without subsidies, right? The biggest subsidy to US corn farmers is that a large chunk of their product goes to make whatever, fuel alcohol, right? Basically, okay? 40% of US corn is not fed to people or to animals. It's used to make alcohol, right? I mean, you know, so this is a subsidy from hell. 40% of the biggest crop in the country, right, is turned to alcohol. It couldn't happen without subsidies, right? So basically, it's nice to talk about having no subsidies, but all Western economies are running on subsidies through and through. I mean, what is not subsidized, right? That's the thing, right? So, I mean, it's an interesting question to ask, but you know, it's utterly impractical unless you get rid of the Western style economies, right? And in China, of course, you know, it's subsidized in the sense that state says what is the state price. So, of course, it's also subsidized, right?
Question: what European innovations in energy would be more feasible and profitable for other continents? Is our world panorama a free and sustainable market? Could we enjoy a less expensive solution?
Or look, for example, I tell you the thing. If Germany, instead of building solar photovoltaic plants in Germany, which is notoriously cloudy and foggy and rain large parts of it, if they would have put all these plants into Spain or Italy and build high voltage lines, the distances are nothing compared to what Chinese have done, right? There's no problem to build an ultra high voltage line from Spain to Germany, from Italy to Germany. This is, you know, technically Siemens can do it tomorrow, right? You know, if they would have done it, Europeans would have cheaper and more reliable electricity than today, instead of trying to, you know, do it like they have done it, right? So there should be some rational solutions to it. If Germany would not have rejected nuclear electricity, but modernized it and kept it, they will be in a much better position than they are today, right? They wouldn't have a declining electricity consumption, and they would have be importing. See, this is the thing. They closed down nuclear power plants, but now they are importing nuclear electricity from France, right? That's the net result of it, right? So you can always do things more rationally. And within EU, there should be a framework to do things really on EU scale, but they are not on EU scale. They are still done on country by country scale, right? know?
Right.
So if EU wants to do things better, do them on an EU scale, right?
Right. Very good point. If the EU, quotable, if the EU wants to do things better, do them on an EU
Yeah,
scale, right?
absolutely.
Okay, another question. You mentioned that energy security is not an issue if you have the money to pay for it. But to my understanding, the issue is the cost. In Europe, our industry have to compete with other companies in the US and Asia who have access
Right.
to much cheaper energy. So the question would be, how can Europe build an energy? Whoops, losing the last word. Anyway, I think we get the question. How can Europe compete with?
As I said, overall, the prices, of course, I mean, it's a global market, so everybody competes with everybody else. But overall, the energy prices, no matter if it's coal or natural gas, right now as they are, what do you call the world or prevailing price, it's not very high, it used to be much higher, right? So we are not in an environment where we would be just, facing some, and as I say, there is more capacity coming. For example, we in Canada, we could produce much more liquefied natural gas for export, but people are very reluctant to invest into it because the market seems to be saturating already, right? So we are in a situation when we are nowhere near to historic highs or energy prices, no matter if it's coal or natural gas. So right now, it's true that Europe is to compete, but right now, the global energy prices are not cripplingly high. They are about as low as they have been in past generation, right? So this is not a problem. Again, the problem is how to use these things efficiently, right? Or more efficiently. So as I say, this has been here for ages. Always people worry about security. But tell me, has it happened in Europe and people will be living in darkness and cold, really? Electricity, energy has been always supplied, really. We never suffered any massive breakdowns of energy supply, even when the prices were very high, right? And now, as I say, prices are reasonably low, right? And the supply is, not only demand, but the supply is increasing, right? So, and you see, anyway, even when you have to pay for it, you've got to pay for it because it's the essential input, right? There are many inputs which are not essential, like flying to Mauritius. That's not essential, right?
I'm looking out on the clock.
Look, it shows you what it, right now, we have globally, we have 23,000 jetliners flying commercial globally, 23,000. Both Airbus and Boeing are now forecasting by 2045 we will need 40,000 and more because people are flying so much to these warm places, right? So how about if we stay home and don't fly to Mauritius and instead of 40,000 jetliners? And again, this is the most energy intensive form of energy consumption, flying to a distant place, right? Do we need more of it or could we have a less of it, right? So I would worry about that before I would worry that our cities will be in dark and we'll all die in cold. Never happened. There's plenty of energy there, and it is affordable, believe me.
Okay, Vaclav, we're running up to the end of our hour, but I want to ask you one last question. If you could wave a magic wand or just influence the several hundred people who are listening to us right now, what single message would you give them about energy efficiency? And I'm guessing maybe it's not to take that vacation in Mauritius.
Useless. You can always use less. Everybody. Individuals can use less. Countries can use less. Everybody always can use less. Right? That's as simple as that. No matter how much you save, you can save even more, really, right? That's the thing, right? I started when I built my house, I started with a super efficient furnace, but at the time it was only 75%. Now I have a natural gas furnace, which is 97% efficient, right? And I could get rid of it, and I could get a heat pump, which would be even more efficient, except we are too cold for heat pump to be very efficient in winter, right? So I don't get a heat pump because at minus 30, it's not so good for it. But if I would be in Germany, I would have a heat pump. If I would be in Massachusetts, I would have a heat pump. Not where I live. Right? So remember, no matter what you have and use, you can always use less. As individuals, as companies, and as nations, you can always use less. We are far away from exhausting the opportunities for using less energy. People don't want to like either. We always use too more. It's better to use more. No, it's better to use less.
That's a very clear message, and one I think we should use to terminate this great conversation, Vaclav. Use less energy.
Absolutely. Everybody can. As individuals, as companies, as countries, we can always use less, right? One thing, as I say, my favorite one, Spain is one of the world's biggest exporters of fruit. All that fruit used to be in kind of whatever, in this paper or wooden little crates of us. Now it's all in clamshells. These clamshells are made from polyethylene terephthalate, plastic, right? All of it is one use. You open the shell, take the fruit, you throw it away. Never gets recycled. You do the calculations. A country like Spain or Germany or Canada, when you throw away these clamshells, which contain that fruit, these blueberries or whatever, they waste tens of thousands tons of plastic every year, which means huge amount of crude oil and natural gas just to open that clamshell, take the fruit out and throw it away. How about if we would have no plastic clamshells in the global food, right? Remember, we didn't have them 20 years ago and we lived okay, right? Now we have them everywhere, right? Okay. There you have it. Right? So it's a one personal example. Never buy, but you see, it doesn't matter. If you don't buy a clamshell food, as a million people will. So this requires the institutional change. The government should say no clamshells. Everything has to be packaged in paper. Everything has to be in whatever, in paper or in little wood, right? Or in some, no clamshells, right? Okay? It's a one example, right?
We can make our efforts as consumers.
If the Western world would stop using clamshells, you are saving, I'm not kidding, you are saving millions of tons of crude oil every year. Millions of tons, okay? Just for clamshells, just for clamshells.
Smil, thank you so much for joining us today on this Bank Innovation Foundation webinar. It's been an enormous pleasure, and I love those very clear messages. No more clamshells and use less energy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you to the Foundation for putting on this webinar. There will be more webinars in the future, so look out for the messages we'll be sending out about them. We've got exciting speakers coming up. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks.